The cutting edge of games tends to move in step with the cutting edge of hardware. However, insanely powerful the latest graphics card or console, it rarely gives players the ability to push 240 frames per second in the latest AAA games without some serious compromises. But high refresh monitor manufacturers have got to have something to help sell their panels, and that then is why games like Valorant exist. Fortunately for those of us who want to play competitive games on laptops and PCs with underpowered hardware, Valorant can run at hundreds of FPS on high-end graphics cards, or at more reasonable rates on even this piece of shit. If you've seen any of my other HD 630 series, link above if not, you'll know I'm running on a slightly overpowered laptop with an i7 7700 HQ. With some tinkering in the BIOS, I'll be simulating more frugal CPUs like the i3 7300T and i5 7500 HQ by switching off cores or hyperthreading. The footage you'll see today is from actual benchmark runs, as all capture was done externally. Testing was done using the lowest settings at 3 resolutions: 1280 by 720, 1600 by 900 and 1920 by 1080. Finally, I have of course disabled the dedicated GPU in Device Manager for the duration of this test. Starting off then with our simulated dual-core i3, I have to say this was a pretty excellent experience all round. At 1280 by 720, we're seeing averages of about 100 FPS and minimums of 60, which makes for an almost flawless experience. Even stepping up to 1600 by 900 and 1920 by 1080, averages stay over that magic 60 mark. The benchmarked 0.1% lows in the 20s reflect a couple of stutters, but I'd say it's been a remarkably playable experience overall. Stepping up to the simulated i5, and we see some substantial improvements over the i3 equivalent. 1280 by 720 jumps up to over 120 FPS. Even at 1600 by 900 and 1920 by 1080, averages are close to or even above 100 FPS. 0.1% lows are mostly improved, and frankly I didn't notice any real stutter during actual gameplay. I can't see a situation whereby you'd run a high refresh rate monitor off an HD 630, but using VSync or MSI's Riva tuner to limit your frame rate could potentially offer a smoother experience even on a regular 60Hz monitor. It may come as a surprise that the more expensive, full-fat i7 actually offers a slightly worse experience than the non-hyperthreaded i5. I can only really hazard a guess that maybe Valorant isn't optimised to work with more than 4 threads, or maybe that the extra demand on the CPU means lower clock boosts, but either way, the frame rates at 1280 by 720 are only slightly better than those from the i3. Stepping up to 1600 by 900 sees higher averages than the i3, but minimums at about the same. At 1920 by 1080, the i7 performs similarly or even worse than the i3. I can only really conclude that if you have a laptop or small form factor PC running an i7 with HD 630 graphics or later, Valorant might actually perform better if you jump into your BIOS and switch off hyperthreading. After all those surprisingly high frame rates and smooth gameplay from the humble little HD 630, well, I couldn't resist trying a few rounds at 3840 by 2160. Not that anyone should even consider doing this. There's literally no upsides to playing in 4K, even down to the crosshairs being too hard to see at such a high resolution, and the frame rates are, well, sort of bearable, maybe. I did a similar video in GTA 5, and the 4K results there were frankly embarrassing. Check out the video on screen now to see the rest of the results. You might be impressed. Kindly do the usual YouTube things if you feel so inclined, and I'll see you next time.